Hey, how's it going everyone? Well, in the video we're going to be doing another Blitz tier list. It has been almost 2 months since I've done the last one. In the meantime, we already have the Wizard's Boots unbanned, which is really nice for the Wizard heroes because now they are kind of viable again. And we've also now have the Emperor and Georgie as well as Arachne, the newest assassin to the club. The Blitz format is in a very good spot right now. Most of the heroes are viable, so for today's video we're going to be looking into where the heroes place in my opinion. This is an opinion that I've shaped from having a significant amount of Blitz experience. I play Blitz as my main format over CC, so I tend to play a large sum of Blitz games in general, and that's where I generally can draw my conclusions from. So for main things first, the big thing that everyone wants to know before we get into the video is which heroes are going to be S tier moving forward in the Blitz format. Well, right now we're in a very weird spot where you need to look at these tier lists in a different light, because on the one hand we have like the very long events like the callings and the pro tours as well as the world championship that we've recently been to, but on the other hand you have these shorter events like skirmishes and armor events. Where we look at skirmishes and armor events, like a lot of these heroes, they can very easily fall in the S tier because they can very easily spike at an event. However, when we look at very long events, and I'm talking about events with like 6 or more rounds, then you typically see that there's like, it depends a bit on how many people attend, but if you have like 100 people plus attending, then there are certain heroes that are kind of coming in at the very top consistently, because once you're at that top seed you kind of cannot lose it, because if you lose 1 or 2 games you generally get so low in your seating that you don't make the top 8 anymore. Because of that, there are some clear S tier winners that do seem to have a higher chance to make it into these top seeds, and that's what I'm basically going to be basing this list on. However, keep in mind everything that I put in the A tier today is extremely viable, maybe even S tier at local event level or skirmish event level. So let's get into it straight away then. So Icelander, obviously it's one of the best heroes in Blitz right now, but the deck does have a very consistent counter in the form of Prism as well as Rhino. Like, both these heroes are very easy at navigating their way around Icelander's stuff. Prism because she can do stuff at instant speed, so she can kind of do stuff at in response to Icelander's triggers, which is kind of nice. And Rhino because, well, Rhino does Rhino things. He can intimidate, make stuff go away, and then coming in with a big attack anyways, making it awkward for an Icelander hero to block efficiently. Because of that, we're in a very weird dynamic that I would say that both of these are definitely S tier heroes. Rhino, on the other hand, if Reiner can keep the top seed, and by keeping the top seed he will get paired into a lot of Icelanders, Prisms and all teams, a Reiner can very efficiently make themselves into, they can farm themselves into the top 8. However, from what I did notice is that once Reiner starts losing like 1 or 2 rounds and it gets paired into any of the other aggro heroes or more of the like anything that tries to push more than 20 damage a turn, this deck gets a bit in trouble. So this deck is really good if it can keep the top seed, but if it loses the top seed, it's probably just going on a massive loss streak, which kind of is why that Rhino win rate on average, when you look at it, isn't all that great. But if it can just keep on facing the Icelands and Prisms, it can sometimes do a lot of good things. Of course, a very good Prism player is going to be able to play around a Reiner deck, because Reiner cannot easily remove all the auras that a Prism player puts down. So generally what you will see is that a Prism will try to get 2 auras live at the same time. So even if Reiner then comes in and destroys one of the auras, there's still the other one left, and then they are in this loop where they can keep on creating more and more value. However, a Reiner that does not focus on the auras and just goes full phase and tries to get everything out of the hand, deal 15 damage, do it again the turn after or something like that with maybe like 10 damage, those kind of builds seem to be operating and doing quite well. So because of that, because it's so consistent at keeping a top seed against these top heroes right now, I am gonna put it in the S tier. I know this is very controversial because on average the hero doesn't perform that well, but I'm kind of reshaping my, how to say, like I used to make my tier list purely based on the win rate of a deck, like on average compared to all the heroes out there, but I feel those type of tier lists only matter in the first round where the pairings are somewhat randomized, but after that, like round 2, maybe it still applies quite a bit because, well, at round 2 the pairings are still kind of random, but round 3 onwards I keep seeing there's always the same faces at the very top, and you need to be able to beat those particular heroes in order to be able to do well in the Blitz format. So keeping top seed is the priority if you want to win big events, and therefore I'm going to just put these 3 up in the S tier. Chain is a very good deck. It's probably, like, for shorter events I would definitely throw Chain in the S tier because it just creates so much value with those Soul Shackles. Even with just a 40 card pool, it is just an absolutely insane deck. But it struggles against some stuff. It struggles against stuff that tries to win the game early, like the Reiner deck. It doesn't really do all that well against the Icelander from what I've been seeing, and this is partially, well, I don't know why. Like, in theory I would think that a chain deck, and this is something I've talked about in the past, that a chain deck can outvalue a Icelander deck by just getting all those Soul Shackles off, but it seems that the Icelander decks can be punishing enough and fast enough that Chain doesn't really have enough time to set up enough Soul Shackles for it to really matter. So by the time that Chain is kind of in a position where it can very easily counter an Icelander matchup, it's not really ready to do it anymore. I guess the way to play around that is if a Chain player goes into the full defense until they have like 3 or 4 Soul Shackles, then they should be able to beat an Icelander rather consistently. But I see too many Chain players trying to go into the aggro plan. Because of that, I'm going to be putting it in the A tier right now. But I do think if people do adjust their playstyle with Chain a bit, that this one might actually be able to become S tier again. The same thing goes for decks like Dorinthia. Dorinthia, a really good deck, a really solid deck. However, there are some heroes that it just seems to be losing against. Having Prism in the format right now, it's not good for Dorinthia. Like, having so many Prisms is kind of bad for a Dorinthia deck. Prism always has been kind of like a natural counter into Dorinthia. The lower life totals do make it less of a uphill battle for a Dorinthia player because they need to just spike like a couple of good turns and then they're pretty much set up and ready to go. And especially with the new, I think it's called Ironsung Pride card that puts a counter on the Dawnblade as early as turn 1, like before you draw up. It's kind of useful and kind of good for Dorinthia to be able to be putting extra pressure that previously it wasn't able to. But because the deck doesn't have many 6 attacks in the deck, it can't really deal with Phantasm aggro matchups in case of Prism. It does still struggle against stuff like Icelander because stuff like Channel, like Frigid, really hurts Dorinthia. Things like Blizzard can really screw a Dorinthia deck. Like if you play your Go Again reaction and they react that with a Blizzard, and you don't have the cards in hand to be able to pay for and the Blizzard, and also be able to play and for the Frostbite it creates, and to be able to pay for all these bullshit things that an Icelander deck can throw at it, it becomes troublesome. On the plus side though, a Dorinthia deck is very consistent at finishing all the aggro decks. Like if you get paired into something like Dorinthia and you play your cards well as a Dorinthia, if you get paired into something like Ira, and you play your cards well as a Dorinthia player, you're gonna have a very good time. If you get paired into into any of the Runeblade, a Dorinthia deck is just really doing quite well against them. Even against a Reiner deck, a Dorantia player, like even when they go down to 2 life on turn 1, if a Reiner has a good turn, they have so much armor available to them that usually they still have it in them to close out the game in the next 2 turns, simply because a Reiner player generally doesn't want to block too much, because they need all the cards to be able to do their full combo turns in general. So Dorantia, a very good deck. However, it struggles against the top decks, and therefore, again, it's, in my opinion, going to fall into the A tier. But my, what a good deck this is. If you want a very solid Blitz deck that you can have a lot of fun with for a very long time, that doesn't really care about... like I cannot imagine anything coming out in the outsider set that is going to make Dorantia a bad deck. Dorantia is just such a good deck simply because of the mind games with having your reactions ready to push the weapon when your opponent underblocks, and to keep it aside and maybe giving a go again and coming in with a regular attack like a Nourishing Emptiness after that. It just has so many flexible play patterns into it, and I think Dorantia is just a very good deck. But we have a big bully in the format right now in the form of Icelander. Keep in mind though, I think Icelander is necessary. If we didn't have Icelander in the format, then all the aggro decks would be going completely rampant in the current format. Like, Icelander right now is kind of making it so that a lot of the other decks are viable that normally wouldn't be viable, because normally we would be in a situation where Ultim is kind of just dominating the whole Blitz format. But because Iceland and Prism are now such a big thing in the format, like, Ultim is not performing all that well anymore, because there's so many natural counters with Reiner, with Prism, and with Icelander to an extent. So it makes it so with Ultima out of the picture that these aggro decks, they can kind of participate. Previously we had Ultim blocking them, now we have these blocking them, but these are more winnable than the Ultim matchup, I would say. So it allowed for some playstyles that normally wouldn't be possible. So I'm kind of happy about that, and I hope that's a trend that continues. Bravo in the Blitz format, not doing all that much. I think that Bravo definitely has a place in the Blitz format, simply because I think it has a decent matchup against Icelander, but I think Bravo has a kind of a tough matchup against Prism, being unable to clear the auras in time, which is problematic, and also against Reiner, because they can just intimidate the whole hand away. Because of that, I think Bravo right now is a B tier hero. Briar has a lot of 2-blocks in the deck, and if you go second with all these 2-blocks, it's just kind of bad. Of course, the Embodiment of Earth is great if you're able to go first, but then going first can sometimes be a bit tricky, that you get stuck with a bad hand, you cannot do much and stuff like that. However, a good Channel Mount Heroic turn is extremely potent, especially in the Blitz format where the life totals are so low. So I do think that Briar is a very good deck. However, I think that right now Chain is the better Rune Blade among these two. I think this one is very close to A tier. Maybe we should even we should widen this tier list a little bit to make it a little bit more room for some of these heroes that are better than the rest to come in here. I guess Ultim definitely still makes it to B tier. I guess that we put Bravo a step down. Briar I will put right behind Ultim. I think B tier is about the right spot for a Briar deck in the Blitz format. Dash, even though that Dash does well, and even with the Tackle Pound and being able to push out such a ridiculous, and I do mean ridiculous, amount of damage, a good player that knows how to counter a Dash deck is going to be able to do so consistently, and that's very important to keep in mind. If you have a Dash player in your local play group, and you do not try to raise them. Like, this deck has some of the highest damage outputs of all the decks out there. You cannot raise a Dash deck, and I cannot emphasize that enough. The best way to approach a Dash matchup in the Blitz format is you just block them out until they run out of cards, because each card they boost, a card gets banished, and after 2 or 3 turns, they're already done with half or more of the deck, and by the time that the third or fourth turn finishes, they're back into the blues that they've been pitching to the bottom in the beginning. So it's very easy to stall them out, and if you can make it so that they can only leak like 1 to 3 damage a turn, and you can keep your life total into healthy amounts, they have really a hard time closing out games. Because of that, it really pains me, because Dash is a solid deck in Constructed, where the life totals are higher and where Dash can bring more cards in the deck to accommodate for decks that will block her out. But I think in Blitz I'm gonna put it into the C tier, because there's a very high risk label attached to this deck that a lot of people can exploit. We have FAB, which is again a deck that can just OTK out of nowhere. It can really just blow up into the opponent's face with a massive Art of War turn, just going in for 30, sometimes even up to 40 damage. However, because of the Blitz format being at such a low life total, and because FAB cannot block much, FAB gets into the trouble that if FAB cannot find his combo pieces soon, and keep in mind we don't have the Master of the Pouncing Links anymore, so we cannot fetch for a Soul to Wound, we cannot fetch for a Lava Burst, and because of that the risk of running this deck becomes higher and higher, therefore also a C tier deck. So next up, Data Doll. Data Doll unfortunately is not viable right now in my opinion. If anyone can make this deck work, let me know. I will send you a call for Data Doll, but let's put the time limit before Outsiders is released. If you can top an event with Data Doll, I'll send you a call for Data Doll. How about that? So I'll just put in the detail for now. I haven't had any success building with it myself. Even with the microchip, it just didn't work the way I wanted it to. There is potential for the deck, especially with the new support. The Data Doll has definitely become better than it used to be, but it's not good enough yet, so it's unfortunately a D tier deck. The 3 intellect really hurts the deck, unfortunately. We have the Merchant Janice. Janice has more and more tools available to it, and as a generic hero, it's like in a fair meta where you don't have decks like Briar just blowing up with 30 damage in a turn, Janice can do kind of well, because Janice has so many access to like efficient defense reactions and stuff like that, that the deck can kind of go toe-to-toe with a lot of decks out there, especially the more quote-unquote fair decks out there, like Durantia, that have a little bit more of a predictable damage output. So because of that, Janice is getting better, but I feel we're still lacking some good merchant support to really push this hero over the edge. And if I compare the performance of Janice to something like a Dash or a FAB deck, which I already put quite low, like I should definitely put these higher, but again, because these have such a high risk tied to it, I think it's still performing even less than these decks. Because of that, I'm gonna be putting it in the D tier. It's definitely better than a Data Doll, for example, but not by much. Ira as an aggro deck would probably be in the C tier, but Ira as a control deck, or a mid-range deck I should say, has been performing quite well for me. Like I got a very good win rate with it, like upwards to 60 or 70%. I don't consider it S tier though, simply because as my Ira deck still struggles quite a bit against Prisms, and it still struggles quite a bit against the Icelander matchup. I was able to fatigue some Icelanders, even in the World Championship when I brought Ira. I fatigued, I think, 2 Icelanders. I managed to get them all the way to no cards left in the deck other than the Heart of Fjendel, so Ira definitely has it in her to close out the games and to fatigue things, but the deck, like, it gets a bit troublesome, like, and this is something that I experienced against Iceland specifically, is that you run a lot of defense reactions, and defense reactions, they are great, they are perfect. You can block 4 damage with a single card, it's amazing. And against Icelander, a defense reaction can also be very, very amazing, because you can block out 4 damage, so if they come in with a 7 attack, you block 1 card from hand, you put a defense reaction on top. It's good, it's great. The problem though is that these decks, they run Channel Lake Frigid, and if you need to stop paying for your defense reactions, it becomes a worse deal altogether. On top of that, because the weapons are the Kodachis, If you're attacking with a Kodachi and you get a Frostbite put onto your side and that's followed up with something like a Blizzard, it becomes kind of difficult to pay for it and to also be able to keep the blues in hand to be able to stop some arcane damage from a Icelander player in general. Because of that, I do think Ira has the means to be a good deck, and in my hands it is definitely performing at A tier level. However, I think most people that are not as experienced with the Ira deck, they are a little bit too impatient. Like, you need to be very patient with this deck and knowing when to strike, which is again something with Chain as well. Like, you need to be a bit patient, block a bit, build up your soul shackles. With this, you need to block a bit, wait for your opponent to have an off turn, and then you go in with your 10 or 14 damage, because the damage cap for an Ira deck is much lower than some of the other aggro decks out there. So you really want to get into this flow of using 2 or 3 cards from your hand to block, and then using your last cards or last 2 cards to be able to attack in with, waiting for an off turn, and then when your opponent finally has an off turn and your life totals are still high enough, you keep your cards in hand, and then you go all in with all your big attacks, go against everything at once so they cannot stop it, and you try to push them down to like 8 life. Like 8 to 10 life is a good range for Ira to get the opponent at, and once you have them in that position, it becomes very easy to keep pushing lethal every single turn, which is like 2 cards in hand, forcing them to block with maybe 2 cards, and then your other 2 cards are very efficiently going to be able to block whatever they're trying to throw your way, which is usually around 6, sometimes 7 damage. So they do sometimes leak a damage here and there, but a 2-card hand is easy to manage for an Ira deck, and therefore I do think it's an A tier deck. But more people need to give the deck a shot, and I've been an advocate for this for quite a while. I made top 64 within the World Championship, and I think that's among the best players out there. And I was kind of going there for the memes. Like, I wasn't expecting to get anywhere, and I feel like top 64 is still a very good placement for going there with an A tier deck. So anyways, Kano has definitely gotten the better deal out of the recent ban list. Kano has his boots back, and that means that Kano is definitely viable now. If it's gonna be good enough in the current format, I'm not really sure about, but I do think Kano has a lot of potential. So I haven't really seen all that much Kano gameplay, and I haven't really started optimizing the deck yet because there haven't been all that many patrons requesting it, so my experience with Kano playing against it and playing with it is quite limited. But if I need to imagine right on the spot, and I have no data to support this, I think Kano can definitely fit into the A tier category again, simply because there's so many tools available to it again. So I am gonna put it in A tier purely of experience from facing and playing this deck in the past, and just kind of trying to judge in my head the tools that it has available and what it can do and how it can close out games. So I do think Kano is a good deck in the Blitz format, but it is going to struggle a bit, especially when we have so much control going around with these two, and when there's still some old teams here and there patrolling that can very easily block out a Kano player completely, especially with things like Oasis Respite, which can turn off a Kano turn completely. However, right now, from what I've seen, people are not running Oasis Respite as much anymore in the main deck because Kano has not been around much. So I think Kano definitely has a chance to shine again in the current format. I'm gonna put it in A tier. Maybe to be on the safe side, I'll put it in B tier. However, if you have Kano data available to you and you're a Kano main and you've been practicing with it recently, leave a comment down in the comment section letting me know how you're performing with this deck and if I should be putting it higher or lower. My guess is it should be A tier, but I'll side with B tier just to be on the safe side, because I don't want newer players buying into this deck expecting it to be a full-on A tier deck and then discovering that actually it's not that good, which can be kind of devastating, especially as a new player. Plus, this deck is very hard to navigate for new players in general anyways, so I'll put it here for now. Kasai, a obvious A tier deck, very close to S tier even. I think Kasai, where should I put it? I think it's slightly better than Dorinthia and a lot better than Ira, so, but I think it's a little bit worse than Chain. I think putting it right here is about the right spot. These two are probably interchangeable, so a very good deck. Again, one of those decks that is just so thematic and so hard for the opponent to play around, especially if they don't know what the copper tokens do. And now that we haven't seen that many Kasai's around, and because we have a lot of newer players entering into the Blitz format, you get into these situations with both these warrior heroes that you end up against opponents that have no idea what they're up against. And I know that doesn't say much for like bigger events, because if you go to a pro tour or something, your opponents are gonna know what it is. But even at a world championship level, I have seen people that I play with my Ira deck and I play a card and they are asking like, oh, what does that do? And they start reading the card and then thinking to myself like, you've been there for a while. Like I do the same with Icelander. Like Icelander, because a lot of the cards, they look very similar to me, and because I play so many decks that sometimes I'm like, okay, what does that do again? And I tend to read it again just to make sure that it is the card that I'm thinking about. However, for the warrior stuff, a lot of people don't really seem to know how the stuff works. They don't really understand how things like reprise work, so it's definitely a deck that you can shine with rather easily, and it's definitely something worth checking out. The Emperor is really... I'm gonna say it now, I think the Emperor is actually a underrated hero, and I've been... how to say, like, I've been thinking about it for a while now, but the Emperor has so many tools available to it because of the, what's it called again, the Flame Skill Furnace. It can very consistently create 3 resources to get that Command and Conquer out of the deck, and because of that, it is really catching people off guard. The low life total, of course, doesn't help it, but you have a lot of very efficient damage dealing cards in this deck, because you can do stuff like 4 damage for 0 with the wizard stuff, you can do 4 damage with go again with things like Scar for a Scar. So this deck is very efficient at pushing damage by keeping the resource curve rather on the low side. However, this deck can't block, and that's a bit of its downside. But I do think that the Emperor is probably a B tier deck, and maybe if somebody refines it, and maybe if we get a couple more draconic pieces, it can even move up a slot. But it's really a sleeper hero. It's like, it's almost genius. Like, if you take all the best tools, all the best generic cards, all the best warrior cards to try and spike your weapon a little bit, and you mix that together with all the efficient wizard actions that can deal a significant amount of damage for a low resource cost, you end up with a deck that can really catch people off guard. And then on top of that, because you are running so many reds, it's a no-brainer to run stuff like Fate Foreseen, Sink Below. I've seen people even run the defense reaction. I forgot the name, but the one that makes you put a card back on the top of the deck just to be able to have a better block in the first turn. I'm not sure if that's really the way to go forward, because I feel like a 2-for-1, it doesn't feel that good. But the deck, when it goes off, it really goes off quite well. And of course, cannot run stuff like Unmovable, because like the high cost of those kind of defense reactions is gonna be a bit too steep for an Emperor deck. But there is potential here, and I think that the Emperor is kind of underpriced right now, and I would suggest, if you don't have an Emperor yet, pick up a copy, even if it's just a Rainbow Foil, because this deck is very close to getting into the same territory that the zero cost Briar deck did in the past, where it has all these very efficient attacks, go against, etc. And you don't want to miss out. Like, make sure that you stock up on those heroes. Maybe buy an extra if you want one as an investment, because I do think the Emperor has potential in the future at some point. We just need to wait and see what that potential actually is. Of course, right now with Iceland at the top, it's very difficult because this deck cannot pay for all the frostbites and stuff like that, but it's gonna get there. It has potential, and I think at a Blitz event level, not a Blitz event, at an Armory event level, this can probably even spike some events very consistently. I've seen Emperors go 3-0 quite a bit, and I think that's something you definitely should try out. Levia is a very cool hero, but we need more Levia support. It's not a super bad hero, but once you're in the low life totals, the blood depth can really screw you over. I've seen some Levia decks that use the blood depth so you can play out of the banish zone with some decent results. Maybe those are the ways to play Levia and Blitz. For now, it's a C tier deck in my opinion. Katsu has a very fun combo going on with the Tigers now. However, I feel with being limited to 2 copies for each Tiger card and having not being able to run a 3rd Tiger Strike, it's just a little bit short on damage to be able to pull off a proper OTK in the Blitz format. Because of that, I do think it's a C tier hero. Probably worse than Phi, but it's a decent hero. It can definitely do its thing quite well nowadays, and it's definitely worth checking out for those of you that are Ninja fans. I think even right now, like, everything that's in the C tier at the moment is still playable, and you need to keep that in mind. It's just not the best anymore. I feel all these heroes are so close in terms of performance nowadays that I could almost put all of this in the A tier and all of these up in the S tier, because the performance is definitely there. So don't be afraid of playing a C tier hero in the Blitz format. You can still do quite well with it. The merchant here, what's his name, Kaftain, not as good, unfortunately. I will have to put that one down in the D tier. Probably a little bit better than Datadol again, simply because it has all those nice defense reactions available to it. Shiana actually got some living legend points recently, which really surprised me. I don't really believe in the deck though. Like, I mean, as more heroes come out, this does get more specializations available to it, and because of that, the deck is definitely increasing in its competitive viability. It's again one of those decks, like, at some point there's gonna be a really good specialization, and then suddenly this deck will be absolutely busted, but I don't think we're there quite yet. I don't think it's D tier though. I do think it's a C tier hero for the time being. But like the bottom C tier, it definitely can do its thing, but it's just not there yet. And Bolton, still a good deck. Like a combo Bolton can really catch people off guard in the Blitz format. I'm gonna put that one over into the B tier. Well, if I put this in B tier, is that fair in contrast to Phi and Dash? Maybe not. I do think this one performs a little bit worse than these. Maybe I should be moving these up a slot and maybe like this. Maybe this is a little bit more fair, and I'm putting Bolton in the C tier. Yeah, I think this is a bit more fair. I do think Bolton, it's a good deck. It can definitely combo off, especially with the new legendary card. However, again, the low life totals, even with all the equipment, sometimes makes it a bit inconsistent for Bolton to pull together all his combo pieces. I'm not sure about the exact percentage, but I believe by turn 3 or 4, it's like a 60% chance to have like 2 pieces that can get you to a double Luminous Ascension, and 60% chance on top of having to win the dice roll and stuff like that to be able to charge your soul properly. It's a bit on the low side, and therefore it's a good deck that can definitely do well just like these two, but it has a big downside. So I'll put it here. Maybe these should be down here like I mentioned earlier, but I think putting them here behind all these other heroes should be quite okay for the time being. KO is a meme. Like, KO can really win games out of nowhere, and it can do it well, but the dice roll mechanic, it makes it a bit too inconsistent. There are some really diehard KO fans out there, and to you, I salute you, but I don't think this will be a very viable top tier deck anytime soon. Maybe when we get new brute support that makes the dice rolling a bit more consistent, or stuff that lets you reroll dice when you attack with something, like any attack that says when you attack with this, if you roll a dice this turn, you may re-roll it, would be perfect for a KO deck if we can get a couple of copies of that, but for now I will put in the C tier. Lexi and Blitz, I think Lexi is definitely a hero that does well in CC, not so much in Blitz though. I do think it's in the upper C tier for sure, probably a little bit better than Bolton even. Valda, by the way, is absolutely amazing in Ultimate Pit Fighter because she can create so many seismic surge tokens from people drawing. It's just crazy what this hero can do because we have so much card draw in the format available to us. So I think in UPF this is like an S tier plus hero. In Blitz, however, not so much. In Blitz I haven't really seen Zelda do much at all. Maybe because it doesn't really have a proper signature spell yet. Because of that, it's definitely a C tier hero. I think it is probably somewhere right there. It's better than KO, a little bit worse than Bolton, I would say. So Georgie, it just doesn't do it. I want Georgie to work, but it basically has no hero ability, and the only thing it has going for it is that it has some extra life, which is really good, by the way. Extra life in Blitz is strong. However, not having a hero ability really hurts heroes so much. I really wish this hero had like a proper hero ability because I would have loved, absolutely loved to have played this hero in Blitz. I might actually still do it sometime soon, be in some casual army events, just because I really love the artwork for Georgie and I want this hero to work so bad, but it just doesn't really work all that well. Azalea, I think Azalea definitely got better recently. Like, it has a lot of targets that it can prey on nowadays, but it's still a C tier deck, I would say. I think it's better than KO, a bit worse than Volda. I'll put Azalea right over here. Benji doesn't do much anymore. Losing the Master of the Pouncing Lynx has been very painful for the Benji decks. I think Benji has dropped to the D tier for sure. We'll put Benji down here. Used to be a very French meme deck already, but nowadays it just doesn't work. And I really like Benji, I really like the playstyle, I like the idea of going with all these small unblockable, like 1,000 cuts kind of ninja deck, but it just doesn't work. Dromai in Blitz, I'm not sure about. I have seen people do decently with it. However, there are too many heroes in the format that can very consistently get rid of the dragons, can very consistently pop the phantasms, so I do think that Dromai is a B tier deck. Is it better than Phi? I don't think it's better, I think it's a bit worse than Phi, but I might be wrong about that. For the longest time I didn't respect Iceland and the Sea in the constructed format, and again, Dromai is one of those decks that, just like KO, not KO, Kano, I have very little experience in the Blitz format with, but just from a guess, I think it's a B tier deck. Again, if you have a lot of experience with this and you're doing very well with it, let me know, because Dromai in the CC format can very easily deal with Icelander, so maybe this could be like a secret anti-meta tech at the moment and it should be up here or something. I don't know yet, but for now I will put it down here. And then finally we're down to Arachne, our beautiful assassin friend. I'm not sure where to place this. Arachne is still in a very weird spot to me. I feel like Arachne has almost all the tools available to it before he really starts breaking the game with all his banner shenanigans, and in the Blitz format it's a bit easier to deck people out because of the lower deck total. However, what I've noticed is that when people face Arachne, they tend to just not care about Arachne banishing stuff, and they just go full face, and they don't stop going full face until Arachne runs out of cards himself. So therefore I don't think Arachne is good enough in the Blitz format right now, and I'm unfortunately having to put it in the B tier for the time being. But I'm very hopeful that maybe we can come up with a deck tech that maybe pushes it to A tier. However, for now I think this is probably where I would put the heroes at right now, as an A tier, being the very top heroes at the moment in my opinion. Of course I may have some Ira bias because I have a lot of experience with the deck does very well for me, so maybe it's a case that it's not the deck that's good, but the player that is navigating is decent at it because I have a lot of Ira experience. But I do think it's a good hero and it's very underappreciated in the current format, and I would highly suggest people to check it out because it's definitely worth it. Another hero that I think is probably undervalued right now that could probably break the format a bit is probably Azalea, because Azalea has a lot of good matchups that she can prey on. Like, she can prey on Mechanologist, she can prey on Phi, I think she can even prey on Reiner, because Reiner only has one activation each turn then, so I do think that Azalea has the potential to maybe move up a few slots, but for now I'll keep her down there, and I think that's where I'm going to be putting my tier list at today. If my opinion changes, like next month, I'll probably do an update again, so keep an eye out for that, but for now I'm gonna keep it at this. All of these, everything that is B tier or higher, I can highly recommend. Maybe not the Arachne, but maybe like the halfway point of B tier high, I can highly recommend for anything that is Armory or higher level. But everything below that, actually maybe in that case I should probably put it something like this, right? We can put like S to B tier. For Armories, perfect. Give it a go, you're gonna have a great time. But these need a bit of work, they need a bit of like a skillful player navigating it, and you need a bit of more patience to really do well with those heroes. And the bottom D tier, I wouldn't even bother. Like, this is if you really want to try harder, you really want to make your main hero work, it's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, that's all from me for today. If you love these videos and you like what I do on this channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit that thumbs up button. And if you want to have personal advice and deck decks, I have those available on my Patreon. I update those regularly, almost every single week. So please check out my Patreon. I might have some stuff on there that might be valuable to you. I do content creation full time, so I really need all the support I can get. And I would kindly ask you, if you have some money spare for content creators and you're going to donate next time, then maybe you would consider donating to my channel, because I can use a bit of support to keep creating content and to be keeping able to pay for the bills. That said, thanks again for watching, everyone, and if you stuck around until the end, I really appreciate you. If you can leave a comment, I will appreciate you even more. And that's all from me for today. Have a great day, have a great holidays if I don't see you until January, because a lot of you are probably going to be taking a break from social medias in general. And yeah, that's all. Take care, everyone, and I will see you soon.